Chapter 5, Washington, D.C., 2035.
Daniel had never been to Washington, D.C. before. He'd seen pictures, studied maps, even watched documentaries about the capital. But nothing prepared him for the sterile hush of power that blanketed the city. From the moment he stepped off the plane, it was clear. This wasn't a sightseeing trip. The air smelled too filtered. The silence was too heavy. Even the sky seemed more tightly wound here. They were met on the tarmac by a black SUV with no insignia, and a driver who didn't speak unless spoken to. Luke sat beside him in full dress blues, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning everything like it might bite. Daniel sat quietly, hands folded in his lap, watching the city slide by behind tinted windows. They didn't stop at the White House. They didn't tour the mall. They went straight to the Pentagon, a gray fortress of overlapping security and quietly humming importance. The checkpoints started early. First ID, then biometrics, then a full-body scan. By the time they reached the private wing Admiral Jackson had cleared for them, Daniel had been vetted more thoroughly than some presidents. The hallway was silent. Frosted glass, brushed steel, and a sense of restrained precision filled the air. No one raised their voice. No one lingered, except one person. "Look what the damn dog dragged in." The voice, rough and familiar, cut through the sterile quiet. Tracy Jackson, her short, jagged hair framing a face that was still too young to carry so much weariness, stood leaning against a polished steel doorway, her one good eye bright and sharp fixed on Daniel. Daniel looked up. Tracy Jackson leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, a crooked grin spreading across her face. She was in full Space Force uniform now, silver piping, command patch on one shoulder. But the scar on her cheek was the same, almost the same, now faded into a silvery crescent that caught the hallway light. She didn't wait. She crossed the hall in 5 strides and pulled him into a tight hug. Daniel didn't resist. "Careful," he murmured. "You're going to start rumors." She pulled back just far enough to look him in the eye. "Let them talk, kid. Besides, you would literally have a better shot than any other man on this planet. Plus, if you think I haven't been dropping your name in every high-level meeting I've been dragged into for the last 3 months, you clearly forgot who you're dealing with." Daniel laughed. "So you are the person I get to thank for being discovered." Now Tracy laughed. "Don't thank me yet, Commander," Tracy said, nudging him with her shoulder. "That's just the preliminary exam." Luke cleared his throat politely, reminding them that he was still standing there. "Lieutenant Commander." "Colonel," Tracy replied, giving him a mock salute that somehow felt both respectful and wildly inappropriate. "Welcome to the future." A door behind them hissed open, and Admiral Jackson stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Good. Now that the reunion is over," he said, dry as dust. "Tracy, you have point on orientation." "With pleasure," she said, already steering Daniel down the hall by the shoulder. "Come on, genius. I'll show you where they keep the aliens." "Ignore her," Jackson said to Luke. "Mostly."
Pentagon orientation.
Tracy didn't waste time. She walked Daniel through a dizzying stretch of secure zones, research labs, classified ops centers, simulation chambers. One hallway opened into a domed room where orbital telemetry streamed in real time across dozens of wall-sized displays. It felt less like a military base and more like the inside of a starship. "This place is insane," Daniel murmured. "Right?" Tracy grinned. "You should see the weapons lab. They've got a railgun named Chompy." He blinked. "They gave you access to a working railgun?" "Your dad was right. Critical thinking is definitely lacking in this place." Tracy gave him a mockingly wounded expression, her eyebrow arching dramatically. "Excuse you," she said, leaning in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "I'll have you know my railgun access comes with very strict protocols. No firing unless absolutely provoked, or unless someone's flirting is particularly offensive to my sensibilities." Daniel laughed under his breath.
Pentagon Strategic Assessment Unit.
Tracy handed him off to a woman named Dr. Greer. Gray eyes, steel demeanor, zero patience for charm. The door shut behind him like a vault. Her words were less than encouraging. Cognitive modeling, predictive analysis, deep scenario forecasting, Greer said briskly. We're testing capacity, not knowledge. Don't try to impress us. Just survive. Daniel didn't flinch. Understood. For the next several hours, Daniel's mind became a scalpel, slicing through complex puzzles and wargame scenarios with surgical precision. Simulated enemy fleets crumbled before his analytical gaze, and encrypted threat models, designed to crush even the most seasoned military strategists, unraveled like cheap sweaters. By lunchtime, he had dismantled 2 entire simulation systems, leaving the room's experts slack-jawed and bewildered. Though he'd never encountered these challenges before, the concepts felt eerily familiar, as if he were reading an ancient language that had always lived somewhere in the depths of his consciousness, the rules not learned, but remembered. By the time he left the lab, his body felt like a spent battery, but his mind crackled with electric intensity, a living, breathing network of synapses humming with the pure, raw excitement of intellectual conquest. This wasn't just engagement. This was a battlefield where complex algorithms and strategic thinking collided in a spectacular mental fireworks display. Tracy intercepted him in the corridor, her keen eye already reading something extraordinary in his posture. "Well?" she prompted, one eyebrow raised in anticipation. Daniel wordlessly handed her the clearance badge, a small rectangular token that now felt like a key, unlocking something far more significant than a secured hallway. "They'll need to completely recalibrate their entire scoring system," he said, his voice a mix of understated confidence and clinical precision. Tracy let out a slow, genuinely impressed whistle that echoed through the sterile hallway. "Damn." Tracy finished the tour and they sat side by side on a bench near the edge of an atrium garden. Glass walls rising around them like a greenhouse built inside a warship. Quiet. Calm. Tracy passed him a fruit cup without asking. "Did my dad give you the letter I wrote?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Good, I wasn't sure he would. I am sure he didn't read it, though, or he would have died on the spot," Tracy said with a smirk. "Just for the record," she said softly, "I meant what I wrote. You got me through the worst. I owe you more than jokes and sugar." Daniel peeled the lid slowly. "You don't owe me anything. We both survived. That's enough. But for the record, your letter is the reason I'm here. There is a lot of noise here, but I wasn't going to miss a chance to see you again. See you away from that place. Back in the real world, I'm so proud of you, Tracy. You made this trip worth it for sure." Silence. Then she smiled again, crooked and warm. "Want another? I've got the good kind stashed." He smirked. "Only if it comes with one of your tragic pickup lines." "Baby," she said, already digging through her bag, "you have no idea how low I can go. Besides, you are the one who almost got a lesbian to kiss you." "When was that?" Daniel asked, with his head tilted in confusion. "Just now," Tracy replied with a smile. They sat together in the heart of the Pentagon, 2 survivors with matching shadows, staring into a future neither of them had expected to still have. And for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to believe it might be okay.
Pentagon. Secure strategic wing the next morning.
The waiting room wasn't marked. It had no placard, no digital signage. Just a narrow, steel-framed door tucked between a vending alcove and a wall-mounted directory that didn't list this wing. Daniel would have missed it entirely if Admiral Jackson hadn't gestured toward it with the ease of someone who knew exactly where power lived, always behind the plainest doors. Inside, the room was Spartan. Long conference table, matte black glass along one wall doubling as a screen, recessed lighting, 6 chairs, and the kind of silence that came only from thick walls and deep secrets. Luke stood by the window, arms folded, still in dress blues. Daniel sat quietly near the middle of the table, turning a pen between his fingers. Tracy sprawled in a chair across from him, legs crossed, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "Peace through overwhelming superiority." The tension wasn't oppressive, just waiting. Then the door burst open. 3 men, all in uniform, none introduced. One was tall and thin, another barrel-chested with a service beard and cold-weather tan. But the third, older, shorter, with deep-set eyes and an Air Force pin worn down to the metal, walked straight toward Jackson. "Admiral," the older man said, breathless. "We had to see for ourselves. This isn't a prank. The assessment scores are impossible. They can't be real." "They're as real as the man who earned them," Jackson replied, gesturing to Daniel, who offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod. The man shoved a secure tablet into Jackson's hands. "Read it, then tell me I'm wrong." Jackson scanned the screen. Once. Then again, slower. Daniel saw the Admiral's expression shift, just slightly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "These are from the Adaptive Cognitive Testing Suite?" Jackson asked, voice low. "Triple verified. Raw latency, pattern acquisition, threat prioritization, cognitive elasticity, and multi-axis response load." Tracy leaned in, eyes sharp. "Translation?" The bearded officer spoke up. "His spatial predictive mapping is off the charts. He's not just calculating scenarios faster than the models. He's finding ones we missed. The AI hit a recursion loop trying to outmaneuver him." Daniel blinked. "That wasn't on purpose, the loop, I mean." The older man let out a laugh like gravel. "Kid, you broke a $20 million supercomputer." Jackson set the tablet down, folding his hands. His face was calm, but his eyes were alive now, narrowed with focus. "So it's confirmed." "Confirmed?" Luke asked, finally stepping closer. "Confirmed what?" The Admiral turned toward Daniel. "That he's not just gifted. He's singular." Daniel swallowed. Jackson stood. "Which brings us to the real reason I asked you here today. This wasn't about testing, Daniel. It is about applying these skills to possible threat vectors." He tapped a control on the table. The wall behind them came to life, revealing a live 3D schematic, a digital battle space, orbital rings around Earth, multiple vectors of colored formations in motion. "Today we are conducting a multi-branch simulation. Strategic orbital defense and engagement scenarios, Space Force, Navy, Air Force, and Army Aerospace Command, each with its own command cell. Tracy's leading the Space Force team." Tracy raised her mug like a toast. "We plan to win and gloat obnoxiously. Short-handed or not." Daniel's eyes were locked on the screen now. Movements, trajectories, flanking waves, emergent bottlenecks. Already he was seeing patterns. Jackson noticed. "I thought that might get your attention." Daniel looked over, guarded but intrigued. "You're running them live?" "With live analysis, yes," Jackson said. "High-orbit warfare simulation. Each team controls a fleet, drones, cruisers, satellite arrays. The objective varies each round. Hold Earth, intercept foreign incursion, protect non-defensive assets." Luke looked skeptical. "So what does this have to do with us?" Jackson smiled. "I want Daniel to sit on the observation deck with me and a few of the Joint Chiefs, possibly some foreign defense liaisons dialing in. For today, all we ask is commentary. Good moves, bad calls, missed opportunities, moments where the battle pivots." Luke smirked. "Like color commentary." "Exactly." Luke snorted. "You're turning my little brother into John Madden." Jackson actually chuckled. "More or less. Just try not to say boom at the end of every sentence." Tracy looked over, grinning. "You'll be great. And if anyone talks down to you, I'll kneecap them." Daniel met her gaze, a spark igniting in his usually placid brown eyes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them before he turned his full attention back to the unfolding digital battlefield. Daniel's gaze drifted back to the screen. Jackson was already tapping commands. "Clear the observer deck. Get the feet up. And someone get me a direct line to naval operations and defense coordination."
Pentagon. Simulation. Observation deck.
The observation deck overlooked a curved command theater below. A dozen tactical operators manned interface stations, each one projecting holographic data in real time, orbital schematics, fleet telemetry, comms intercepts, and kinetic energy dispersion plots. Daniel entered behind Admiral Jackson and Luke. The room was dim but humming with quiet tension. 4 Joint Chiefs were already seated behind angled glass terminals, speaking in low tones. Their body language was clipped, curious but skeptical. Remote feeds were projected into 2 side panels. Small holograms flickered to life as overseas liaisons joined. British RAF, a French orbital warfare director, a silent Japanese admiral who offered only a nod. Jackson gestured Daniel to a seat between himself and Luke. "Round 1, Jackson announced. Space Force versus Army Aerospace Command. There was a beat of silence, then a dry voice from across the table. "Is that even a fight?" "Army's got 3 times the tonnage and twice the carrier presence." "They do," Jackson agreed. "But I'd hold judgment. Space Force brought a thinker. As I have been telling the President, the most important part of a space defense strategy is the brains who develop and implement it." The simulation lit up. On screen, Space Force assets appeared. Sleek, low-mass interceptors, tethered drones, forward-deployed sensor clouds. Army's presence was immediate and overwhelming. Heavy orbital gunships, saturation missile cruisers, old-world brute force. Tracy's voice came over the comm. "Space Force Team Alpha in position. Fleet cap confirmed, ready to engage." The room didn't react. One of the generals muttered, "Cute." Daniel leaned forward, scanning the deployment. "She is baiting them," he said softly. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Daniel tapped the edge of his tablet, pulling up a secondary sensor overlay. "Army deployed their line too wide. It looks aggressive, but they're feeding Space Force targeting solutions without realizing it. Tracy's drones are already seeding the pathing routes. When the Army ships hit their midpoint burn, they'll be exposed for a 9-second window." "Exposed how?" one of the generals asked. Daniel zoomed in. "No angular correction room. They'll either have to hold course or risk fuel starvation in a mid-maneuver burn." The French liaison leaned closer to his mic. "Is that intentional?" Daniel shook his head. "Not on the Army's side. It will hurt, a lot. Perhaps not enough to change the outcome. But the fight will now last a lot longer than it should have." The battle began. The Army moved first, slow and confident. Kinetic pulses fired, long arcs arcing toward their targets. Space Force answered not with firepower, but with subtraction. Half their fleet vanished from the board. "They went dark," the British liaison said, baffled. "No," Daniel corrected, his voice barely a whisper. "They are using the orbital debris as cover. Army's firing blind now, wasting ordnance." The battlefield projections flickered, Tracy's remaining ships a phantom threat, turning the Army's might into a futile, blind rage. The room stirred. Now, false mass signatures. They moved the real fleet into the magnetic shadows of the orbital ring. Tracy's team emerged 9 seconds later, on the flank. The first Army cruiser took simulated damage, then another, then comms blackouts. The British observer exhaled. Bloody hell. Jackson didn't say a word. He just smiled. Luke looked over at Daniel. "How far ahead do you think she planned that?" Daniel didn't look up. "I don't know, probably at birth. Give Tracy enough time and she plan her way out of a gravity well. She is the only person who has ever beaten me at chess." And in that moment, the Joint Chiefs stopped watching the screen. They started watching him.
Pentagon, observation deck.
The feed refreshed. The simulated battlefield dissolved into digital mist, resetting itself for round 2. Tracy leaned back in her seat on the lower level of the control deck, expression unreadable, her jaw tight but not bitter. Her team had performed well, clean formations, clever diversionary runs, even a few unexpected wins in orbital skirmishes, but ultimately, the math caught up with them. Army Aerospace had triple the hardware, double the ECM footprint, and a command team that knew how to exploit saturation. She didn't sulk. She just took a sip from her dented steel thermos and nodded to herself. Lessons learned. Above her, Daniel watched the reset from the elevated gallery, seated between Luke and Admiral Jackson. The air here was colder, filtered and pressurized, and the chairs were spaced far enough apart to suggest this space wasn't for camaraderie but for judgment. That battle should have been over in 5 minutes. The Space Force team was exceptional. It would have taken a catastrophic mistake by the Army team for them to lose. They understood that. It was a messy victory, but a victory nonetheless, Daniel lamented, trying to stay objective but clearly proud of his friend, and frustrated by the way the scenario limited her. "She's a natural-born commander, Admiral," Daniel said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "But even a genius needs the right tools." As the next set of combatants initialized, an older general leaned toward Jackson and asked in a voice too low to be fully respectful, "How sharp is he going to be now?" He knew the Space Force team, might have even had informal contact with some of their protocols. But Navy versus Air Force? These aren't his people. Another voice joined in, Vice Admiral Thompson, his face a wall of confidence framed in ribbons and polished brass. "Navy doesn't play predictable. My command team rotates tactics weekly. They don't even know what they'll be doing until they brief in. This'll be different." Jackson didn't reply. He simply glanced at Daniel. Daniel's posture hadn't changed, hands folded in his lap, legs still, eyes locked on the screen. He didn't flinch when the Navy's fleet composition populated: 5 destroyer-class cruisers, a railgun-equipped drone carrier, and 2 silent runners orbiting low and dark. Air Force brought the speed: 12 interceptors with coordinated jamming systems, 2 stealth payload drones, and an orbital overwatch satellite. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Something wrong?" Luke asked quietly. "No," Daniel said, I've seen this before." "You've seen a Navy versus Air Force orbital war game before?" "No," Daniel said again, slower. "But the logic paths are familiar." The battle began. Daniel saw it all: the formations, the feints, the tactics, the mistakes, and the outcome. He saw it all in his head minutes before it happened for everyone else. "He's predicting the outcomes with remarkable accuracy," Admiral Jackson stated, his voice a low rumble that commanded the attention of every person in the room. Luke, still trying to keep up, managed, "Predicting it? Hell, it feels like he's orchestrating it." "Jesus," one of the generals whispered, "he's inside the loop." The scenarios change: personnel groupings, assets, objectives. But one thing stayed the same. Daniel saw it all, understood it all, and in moments was dissecting aspects of the battles no one else had considered. Admiral Jackson, witnessing Daniel's prescient analysis, felt a thrill of dawning realization. This wasn't just prediction. It was a glimpse into a mind that could rewrite the very nature of warfare. Daniel's quiet pronouncements were not merely observations. They were the blueprints of future victories, or perhaps future defeats. In the final simulation, the Army secured the outer ring, neutralized the Air Force support craft, and leveraged orbital positioning to deny re-entry vectors. With 22 minutes left in the sim, the adjudicator called it Army win. But no one in that room mistook the result. Daniel stood slowly, the blue light reflecting off his glasses. He didn't gloat. He didn't explain. He just looked down at the silent field of digital carnage like a chess master walking away from a board. "Final logs?" Admiral Jackson asked quietly. One of the techs nodded. "All analyst commentary time-stamped and archived. We've already flagged 15 insights the model didn't catch." Thompson exhaled through his nose. "He's not a prodigy. He's a battlespace engine in a hoodie." The observation gallery remained dimly lit, the simulation feed still flickering with the afterglow of battle. Around the perimeter, voices rose. Not in celebration or despair, but in argument. "It was impressive," said a Navy intelligence officer over the comms, "but let's not pretend this wasn't stage-managed. You drop a fresh face in the room, feed him a few patterns, and suddenly he's the oracle of orbital warfare." "That fresh face just predicted 8 tactical shifts with 0 access to internal comms," someone else countered, their badge icon flashing red for Army. He's not guessing, he's seeing. Or we're all just being suckered by a PR stunt, grumbled another voice, a private sector liaison. Jackson wants to prove Space Force matters. What better way than a headline-making prodigy? Luke glanced toward Daniel, who hadn't moved from his chair. He was still staring at the screens, eyes reflecting lines of code and movement as if they were constellations. He didn't flinch at the growing tension in the room. "Let's settle this debate. Put him in the chair," a gruff Marine colonel said. "Let him lead. See how long the Wonder Boy holds up when it's real pressure, when you can't pause the feed and sip coffee while making commentary." "He's not a warfighter," said another. "This is the military. He's not even enlisted." "And yet," murmured someone near the Air Force comm node, "he just made all of us look like we were playing checkers." For a moment, it spiraled. Branches began defending their teams. Some demanded new simulations. Others called for removing Daniel from the equation entirely. Words like unfair, political, and unproven bounced between feeds. Then a new voice joined the channel. Steady, clear, female. "Thank you, everyone." Silence. Even Admiral Jackson stood straighter. He turned to a secured console which now bore a single emblem, the seal of the President of the United States. "Madam President," he said. President Hart's voice carried no tremble, just that practiced evenness born from years behind a podium and under fire. "I've been listening," she said, "and I want to thank each of you for your passion. It's clear you care deeply about readiness, about merit, and about fairness." A pause. "So let's test that fairness." The Space Force team was outgunned today, outmanned, and the scenarios did them no favors. We all saw it. And while Commander Jackson and her team fought well, they were never going to break through a 3-to-1 advantage. So let's even the odds a little. No one interrupted. "Run the Army versus Space Force simulation again. Same assets, same structure. No additional ships, no new weapons. Just one change. Add another strategist to Space Force's command team. Admiral Jackson keeps telling me that the most important element to orbital defense is someone who doesn't think he is fighting a ground war. So let's see if he is right." The room crackled. "You mean Taylor," said a Navy admiral. "I do," Hart replied. "He won't command. He'll advise, nothing more. But he will do it from inside the fire, not sipping coffee." Another voice snapped in. "You can't just insert a civilian into an active command structure mid-sim. The other team's prepared for weeks. It throws off the balance." "Madam President," Admiral Jackson began carefully, "it's not just the other branches. I'm not sure it's fair to Daniel. He has roughly 5 hours of total experience in this environment. These officers won't follow his recommendations. Not from someone they have known less than a day." The president was quiet a moment. "You're right. So we aren't going to add one person to the Space Force command team, we're going to add 2. We solve the chain of command issue. We fill that gap with someone who knows Daniel, someone who understands rank." She didn't name him. She didn't have to. Everyone looked at Luke. Admiral Jackson folded his arms slowly. "Colonel Taylor, if you took command of the Space Force sim team for this scenario, Daniel could serve as your civilian tactical advisor. Commander Jackson would maintain direct control and keep the chain clean." Luke looked from the Admiral to the screens, then to Daniel. "What do you expect from us?" President Hart gave a small, audible smile. "I want to see what happens when genius meets structure, and I want everyone to know that I am always listening. It's been questioned how well Daniel will perform under pressure, so let's add some. Give the Taylors some skin in the game. The winning command team gets a full-grade promotion across the board. That now includes you, Lieutenant Colonel Taylor. Daniel, you devise and help execute a winning strategy. Not only will Tracy Jackson get promoted to full commander, but your brother will be a full-bird colonel by the end of the week." Gasps, murmurs, then silence again. "That's right. You find a way to win and you advance your brother and your friend's career by years overnight." President Hart closed the discussion with quiet finality. "We resume in 2 hours, dismissed." the line went dead.